Okay, next we'll mark out for where the hole starts. I can eyeball this across, and when I get it just perfect, I'll make a mark on each side, and that's where I'll start punching the holes. Start here and come right down the line on each side. I'm also going to take this piece that we cut earlier and we'll set it on the wallet flush with one side, and we'll come over here and I'm going to mark it right like that, and we'll cut that to length. Place my square against the wood and push the leather against the square. Move right down to the line, and I'm actually going to cover up the line. It's okay if the strap is just like a 64th of an inch wider than the wallet. That's fine. Because since this is on the outside, just an ever so slight extra length will allow it to bunch up a little bit more and help it when it expands. Next, we're going to punch the holes. Okay, so you can see I've done the same thing on this piece. And we're going to punch the holes by eye. There's the holes in the strap. I lightly press to make an indent in the leather so I can see exactly where it's going to punch the holes. Then I can adjust. And go ahead and punch the first set of holes. Then I'll go right down that line. And there we go. And what I do is the last hole left by the first punch, I'll use that hole in overlap. You'll see on the other side again. Make the adjustment till it's just right. Right there. Then I'll move it down. And I'll use this first prong in the last hole. So my spacings are all exact. See how that looks. And punch it. And there we go. Then our strap will go on just like that. It's time to do some stitching. I already did the first side, which will hold this in place and make it easier for me to show you the second side behind the camera. I start out with a piece of thread that's 6 times longer than the area that needs to be stitched. So I'd start out by measuring that, fold it again, and then that's 3, and then double that for 6. That gives me a little bit extra on each end to play with. Now to start the stitching, I have a needle at each end. I'll go through the first hole at the top, and then grab the 2 needles and pull them so that I have an equal length. Next, I'll put my finger over one end to hold it in place because this thread moves very easily. It won't stay centered. And I will go through the second hole. You can't pull it tight yet. Then I take the other end and I go back through that same hole. Confirm you have still the same length. That's close enough. And then I pull it tight. Okay, next what I do is I want to strengthen this because this point here is where it's going to take the most stress from opening and closing the wallet. So this first set of holes I double stitch it. So what I will do here is I'll take the needle and I'll come back up through the top hole, as you can see there. And take the other needle and go back through the top hole. And pull it tight. Now you've doubled up on that first one. Now you just go down as normal, alternating. So I'm going to go up through the second hole. And then back down through the second hole. And since doubling up on these stitches are a little hard to do because it's a lot of thread in the small hole. It gets kind of wedged in there tight. Pull that nice and tight. Then you have a good, clean looking first stitch. Now we can just proceed the rest of the way as normal. I'm going to go up through here and up through the first hole in the leather strap. Then I'm going to take this one, I'm going to go down through that same set of holes. And pull it tight. Now this would be a little easier if you had a stitching pony, which I don't have. Sometimes what I'll use, let me see if I have one handy. I'll use one of these wood clamps. I'll position it and clamp it down to the table, and then that'll give me a makeshift stitching pony. Remember, you're always passing both needles through the same hole, sewing from each side. And it's hot out here. My hands are a little bit sweaty, so they get slippery. Pull it good and tight. Hopefully I'm staying in frame most of the time here. It's not easy to do this behind a camera. Now, there are a couple different thoughts on doing this stitching. Some people will make a groove here that the stitching will sit into. I choose to pull the stitching really tight, and when I'm finished, I'm going to just tap it lightly with a hammer to try and set it as flush as possible to the leather. So I try and squash the leather a little bit so that the stitching ends up flush rather than cutting a groove. And my thinking on that is, if you cut the groove, you're already dealing with thin leather here, 4 or 5 ounce leather. And if you cut a groove in it, are you weakening the leather? Once you get rid of this harder skin surface, to me it seems like the thread would pull through the softer underneath a little bit easier. So those are two things I debate on whether or not to try making a groove for the leather first. I've chosen to do it this way. Just thinking through it, logically the way my brain works, but I very well could be wrong, and I would have to contact somebody, talk with somebody that's got far more experience with leather than I have. I think on a thicker piece of leather it would be no problem at all. But I question which way is going to be better with the leather we use for things like wallets and knife slips. If the thread is sunk underneath the leather kind of hides it from taking that abrasion. On the other hand, will the leather give out first? Okay, here we go. Now we're down to the last hole. Pull it good and tight, and then I come back up. So I'm going to come up through here, backtrack just a couple stitches for strength. I'm going to get a pair of pliers. And we'll pull it tight. And then go back down. Now I have both stitches coming out the bottom. I'm going to pull each one tight. And then you'll see the excess. You could go a little bit shorter than the 6, but I like to have the extra room to maneuver. Then I'm going to cut the thread off, leaving a little bit of a tag sticking out. And we'll take our Zippo, get a nice flame established, melt them down, use the bottom of the lighter, and push it. Then you end up with a nice end where it's melted and it will not pull back through. So that's how I do the stitching. Next, we'll be cleaning up and burnishing the edges.